Once upon a time, a hard-working king ruled a kingdom. He cared for his people. He made sure they lived safely and had everything they needed. Whether they were farmers, traders, or laborers. He treated them all with fairness. He spent his days fixing problems. He made sure everyone had food. He had a wise and loyal minister. The king trusted him completely. There was a young man named John, a clever thief. One night, he thought,
"It's time to act. Heavy food isn't right. I should drink milk."
He warmed the milk, poured it into a glass, and drank it. Then, he grabbed his tools and left. As he reached the targeted house, it was dark and silent. He climbed the wall, slipped inside, and crept to the bedroom. The owners were sleeping peacefully. He opened the cupboard, took the jewels, gold, and cash, and packed in a bag and left without a sound. At home, he counted the money and calculated the worth of the shining jewels.
"Perfect,"
he whispered. The next night, he hid everything in a secret place. One day, the king sat with his minister in the palace.
"Tell me, how is the new courtier, Mr. Harris?"
the king asked. The minister smiled.
"He is excellent. He ensured rice supply on time and solved farmers' issues. I am very satisfied."
The king nodded.
"He deserves a reward. This will inspire others."
"Yes, Your Majesty."
The minister agreed.
"I will give him gold cufflinks. They are precious."
The king decided. The minister smiled, and they continued discussing kingdom matters. The next day, in court, the king said,
"Mr. Harris, I am pleased with your work. You worked hard, so I reward you with gold cufflinks."
Mr. Harris bowed deeply.
"Thank you, Your Majesty."
The king stood up from his throne, stepped forward, and handed the gold cufflinks to him. Mr. Harris accepted them, bowed again, and took his seat. The king then began hearing cases. John found out the courtier got gold cufflinks. His next target was set. While eating dinner, he picked up an omelette and grabbed some bread. He took a bite and smirked.
"So, Mr. Harris has gold cufflinks? Interesting."
He chewed slowly, thinking,
"I want them. But how?"
He glanced at his plate.
That's a courtier's house, not an ordinary man's. I need to be careful.
Then, an idea hit him. He grinned.
I know what to do.
After finishing his meal, he stretched, went to his room, and lay down. Soon, he was fast asleep. After a week, one morning, John arrived at Mr. Harris's house.
I need a job for house chores. Please inform inside.
He told the guard. The guard went in, and soon, Mrs. Harris called him. She looked at him and asked,
Have you done house chores before?
Yes, ma'am.
John replied.
Can you cook as well?
She asked.
No. But I can learn.
He said. She nodded.
You are hired. You can move into the servants' quarters and start tomorrow.
Yes, ma'am.
John replied. He went home and packed his things. By evening, he moved into Mr. Harris's servant quarters. The housekeeper called John.
Clean the floors and dust the shelves.
He grabbed a mop, wiped the floors, and carefully dusted each shelf. The housekeeper checked his work and nodded.
Now wipe the windows.
John nodded and got to work. After a week, one night, John whispered to himself.
Tonight, I will steal.
He drank some milk and waited. At midnight, he slipped out of the servants' quarters. The house was silent. Slowly, he entered Mr. Harris's room and opened the cupboard. Suddenly, Mrs. Harris turned in her sleep. John's heart pounded. He froze, holding his breath. After a few tense moments, he carefully grabbed the gold cufflinks. He held them tightly. Then, he put them into his bag and crept out. Jumping over the wall, he ran home. His hands trembled as he took out the cufflinks, their golden shine reflecting in his eyes. A smile spread across his face. The next morning, Mrs. Harris woke up and jolted upright. The cupboard was open.
Oh no.
She cried. Mr. Harris sat up in surprise. Then his eyes widened.
My gold cufflinks! They are gone!
Hearing the commotion, the servants gathered outside the room. Mr. Harris stepped out.
A thief robbed us!
He shouted. Then he noticed someone was missing.
Where is that new servant?
A servant rushed to the quarters, but soon returned, breathless.
Sir! He is gone! He ran away!
Mr. Harris hurried to the door.
Where are you going?
His wife called. He turned back.
To the court! I will tell the king!
Then he stormed out. Soon, Mr. Harris reached the court and waited for the king. After some time, the king arrived with the minister. Harris bowed deeply.
Your Majesty, I have been robbed. A thief stole my gold cufflinks.
The king said.
Don't worry. We will find the thief.
The minister patted his shoulder.
Go home and relax.
The king nodded.
We will take care of this.
That evening, the king discussed the matter with the minister.
What should we do?
The minister smiled.
We will use the same trick.
The king smiled.
All right. I will give you a gold photo frame.
The minister nodded and left. The next day, in court, the king announced.
The minister works tirelessly. I want to reward him.
Then, he handed him a gold photo frame. The minister took it home. Catherine was delighted to see the gold photo frame. When the minister explained his plan, her smile faded.
You mean the thief will come here?
The minister laughed.
Of course. He will hear about it. And he will come.
He comforted her.
Don't worry. I won't let anyone harm us.
That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. A sudden noise startled her awake. The minister sighed.
Dear, try to sleep. I am with you.
2 weeks passed, but the thief didn't come. One morning at breakfast, Catherine said,
I think he won't come.
The minister smiled.
He will come, surely.
One evening, at the palace, the king said,
The thief hasn't come yet.
Then he smirked.
Maybe he is scared to enter your house.
The minister just smiled. One night, John smiled.
I'm coming. Minister. That gold frame is mine.
At midnight, he sneaked into the minister's house and entered the room where the minister and his wife slept. He carefully opened the cupboard. John grabbed the frame and turned to leave. But suddenly, the minister's eyes opened.
Guards! Catch the thief!
He shouted. John panicked and ran out of the room. Catherine woke up in fright at his sudden shout. John dashed toward the wall. But just then, the guards appeared and caught him. The next morning, the royal guards brought John to court. The king frowned.
You have robbed many. Even our courtier Harris.
John smirked.
It all happened by God's will. I did nothing on my own.
The king's face darkened.
Throw him in prison!
The guards dragged John away. Later, the minister visited him.
Tell me where the stolen goods are, and I will save you.
John hesitated, then revealed the secret place. The minister took the royal guards and recovered everything. A week later, John stood before the king again.
You were caught red-handed. You will spend your life in prison.
The king declared. John turned to the minister.
You lied! You promised to save me!
The minister smiled.
It all happened by God's will. I did nothing on my own.
John stood in shock. And the guards took him away. Moral: deception brings downfall.